Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Hello everyone, I'm Nicoleta Nakieva and welcome to the Media and Communications Guest Speaker Series hosted here at the Tank, Coventry University. In these sessions, we will be joined by experts from all sectors of the media industry who will share their valuable insights and experiences. You can catch us live on our YouTube channel and interact with us via Twitter using our hashtag CITM. This week, we are joined by two guest speakers from Whistle PR, Hayley Longden, and Client Services Manager, and Delia Goldsby, who is Head of Social. Our team today is Public Relations, so let's give a big round of applause for our first guest, Hayley Longden. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hayley, and as Nicolette just said, I'm from Whistle PR. I really just wanted to come in and talk to you about my career to date, the different roles that I've had, and the different opportunities that that's presented, but equally a bit about the industry, what you might want to know before you embark on your own careers, and some tips that I wish that I'd been told before I started working as well. So 13 years ago, I was sat where you guys are on a media and communications course, albeit 20 miles up the road in Birmingham. And I had chosen in the second year, which I believe is where you guys are now, to specialise in journalism. So we had options. It was either TV, journalism, radio or PR. And the obvious thing here is that I now work in PR, but at the time I chose journalism. And that was something that I always wanted to do. From the age of about 14 or 15, I started to get work experience in local newspapers and really just to better my own understanding of how things worked within print media, but also because simply I love to write, and that was the best opportunity I had, being from quite a small village at the time, that I could really go out and start to learn a bit more about that industry. So I chose to do a media and communications course because I didn't quite want to pigeonhole myself too much into one thing at the time. And it was during that course that I started to really think about what my career options would look like. And for me, there was never a question. It was always going to be, I want to be a journalist. So in my third year, I started applying for roles. And journalism is obviously quite a diverse sector, as you know. And what I didn't want to do was really specialise in one thing. So I started applying for roles in newspapers and magazines and online journalism, and pretty much anything with a journalist tag I went for. And I must have applied for 20 to 30 roles before I got an opportunity. And I kind of expected that at the time, although I didn't expect to sort of apply for 5, 6, 7 of those a day. But that's how long it took to find the right opportunity. And it was one afternoon, just looking through the Birmingham Mail, that I saw a tiny little ad for an assistant editor job at a local independent newspaper. So I applied, and to be honest, thought I was probably underqualified for what they were looking for, but quietly hoped that I'd at least get through the door and get an opportunity. So off I went, sort of with my bulging portfolio book of drivel that I'd written over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And I actually managed to get the job, which I was really, really surprised at. And I would say that's probably the last lucky break that I had in the industry, because I know loads of people went for that. But I do genuinely believe it was the attitude that I went in with which really did secure that opportunity for me. So it was kind of here that it really began. I handed in my dissertation one day, and the next day I was sat at my first desk ready to start my first career job. So I worked as an assistant editor at the Birmingham Independent for about 2 years or so, and I loved that job. I had the autonomy to go out and find news stories, to seek out news, to interview local people and local businesses, celebrities. I did the photography, I wrote columns, I did the showbiz page, I got to review new makeup brands and go to Spain on press trips. And at the age of 21, this really was an amazing job. I don't know, Delia, I don't think these jobs exist anymore, if I'm completely honest. But I felt so lucky to be able to be in the position where I was doing something I loved, but learning so much as well. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't all rosy and it wasn't easy by any means. It was very, very long days with print deadlines almost daily, late nights as well. If your paper's not ready by the time you go to print, you kind of just have to keep on going for the next print slot. So that was really tough. And going straight from uni into a first sort of career job that was so full on, it was pretty exhausting. But I think that's probably going to be the case for every job that you go into. I also made mistakes as well, and I learnt from those, but it's quite tough when those mistakes are in print, mainly in the headline on the front page, which is not my finest moment, to be honest. So just to kind of caveat all this, this was about 2006, 2007, and you probably remember as well, this was the time when everything really started to change in print journalism. So you had a lot of independent titles or weekly titles ceasing or merging. There were a lot of redundancies happening within the industry. So the big media houses were really starting to condense their staff. And the titles that kind of did hold on by a bit of a thread were looking at different ways that they could really digitalise what they were doing. And again, just to provide some further context, this was the year where Facebook really began to be a thing. And I think things like MySpace, which I don't know if you've even heard of, and Bebo and things like that were dying a bit of a slow death. So that kind of puts into context where things were moving, and you know, this whole social, digital aspect of kind of print journalism at least was really quite new. And it was around this time where I'd started to build up a real understanding of how the other side of journalism and how the other side of media might work. And that was really my first kind of introduction into what PR looked like. And I'd met quite a lot of PR people over the last couple of years doing the job that I was doing. And actually it seemed like a really good hybrid opportunity for me because A, I still got to write and I still got to work with journalists, albeit in a different way and albeit seeing my work in print, but not necessarily with my name attached. So that was really when I started to think about making the next move. And so I signed up to a couple of agencies. So Pitch, I don't know if any of you guys sort of specialise in PR at all, but they're a really good agency to put your name down with. And I started to get a couple of opportunities through. But I'd also built some really good relationships of my own. And it was at this point that I started having conversations with somebody from an agency called Trimedia. I considered them to be quite a cool agency. They did some really big brand stuff. And they used to work with the likes of Bullring Birmingham and High Cross Leicester. And that kind of side of PR really appealed to me. So it just so happened a job opportunity opened up. I applied for that job. And that's really when I landed my first opportunity in PR. And it's an agency that you may now better know as Grayling. So I started there in 2008, and I won't lie to you, it was really hard. The shift from being a journalist with the freedom and autonomy to basically write what you wanted, within boundaries, of course, to being on the PR side, where you're quite restricted in what you write, in the boundaries of the client that you work with. And I struggled to really get my head around why we did things the way that we did. So why we write a press release on this, that and the other, and maybe not why we don't write something on something else. And why perhaps we reported in the way that we did, and what the hell was AVE? You know, it was quite a tricky thing for me to really get my head into. But slowly but surely I began to get it. And Deals, I don't know if you've seen the same, but in the last sort of 11 years that I've been working in PR, I've worked with 20, 30 AEs that they sort of come in and do a great job, and they come in at the start of the day, they do what we need them to do, and then they leave. But one day they just get it. And I remember being in that situation where suddenly I just got it. And I was like, okay, right, I've got this. I know what I'm doing. And that was a real turning point for me. And I worked really hard. And one of the things that I did, and I would always advise that anybody does, is try to stand out from the crowd. I worked for a company that had 9 offices around the UK, and I really saw that as an opportunity for me to not just be the best that I could be in the office that I worked in, but try and contribute to the other parts of the business as well. And I started to kind of engineer opportunities for myself in that respect. So perhaps working with another team that maybe are synonymous with what I'm trying to do, or they have a client that's quite similar. Or I've learned something from a tricky situation that maybe I need to pass on to them. And I remember doing this vividly and remember thinking, this is a no-brainer for me. Why is everybody not doing this? So that's one of the things that I would always recommend. And I remember being promoted to an account manager and not really seeing it coming. And I think that was the point I was like, okay, I do get it. And other people are starting to believe that. So that was a real kind of thing for me. And something that I still think back and I'm like, right, okay, that's where it really began. What I would say about becoming an account manager, possibly in any part of a media career, is that is genuinely the hardest role I think you'll ever have. You have to be sort of a jack of all trades when really you need to be a master of one. You're expected to know multiple sectors, multiple tactics, come up with new ideas. And your role starts to become more strategic. So you start to really think about how you create plans, and working in a consultancy, how you really start to consult your client. So this whole thing where I talked about, I don't know why I'm doing a press release or why are we not doing this but doing that, that's where it really starts to come to life. And actually, I found this was a point where I really started to thrive. And one of the points of account management is working with people. And I found that working with people was a real strength of mine. So I began line managing and really getting involved with the wider company initiatives to support talent, which I found really rewarding and something that I still enjoy doing today. And this is really where I started to understand the commercial side of business. So working on new business opportunities, bringing in new opportunities, working on new business, which is something I really loved. And that was the first step really into management that I turned out needed to grasp pretty quickly. So I was promoted to an account director around the time where Tri-Media morphed into Grayling. And suddenly we were this big old agency with multiple offices, not just in the UK, but around the world, which personally I saw as a big opportunity. But going from sort of this small owner-managed company to this company that had 8 offices throughout the UK to suddenly this big global platform was actually really exciting, but it was kind of nerve-wracking as well because I felt like I needed to prove myself even more. So I made it to AD about, I don't know, age 26 or so, and suddenly was part of the senior team within Grayling. And that wasn't just within the Midlands office, but as part of the wider network as well. And I was pulled in to help other teams with clients that maybe they were struggling with, or teams that maybe needed a little bit of support in TLC. But I did get to work on some huge campaigns, not just in the Midlands, but also across the UK. A lot of which was in retail, which literally sort of started to become a bit of a PR passion for mine. And I'll talk in a minute about sort of how you define or sort of figure out a route that you might want to take within your industry. I became sort of a bit of a voice for the Grayling regions, if you like, and we had, like many companies, a London HQ, and there's a big difference, I think, between working with a big London agency and a regional agency as well, and that was something that I really thrived on as well. So it was about this time that we secured an opportunity with quite a big retailer, and I feel really proud to say now that I led the PR across the corporate, fashion and food and drink for Marks & Spencer, which was an amazing opportunity and really good to get a good sense of how kind of a bigger picture client might work across the UK. So I was an AD for around a year, before I was promoted to associate director, which is quite unusual. Usually you spend, I think, a good couple of years at each band. But like I sort of mentioned before, I was really sort of trying to engineer opportunities for myself so that I could grow within the business. And it was here that I started to take on more of a management role, so looking at things like growing the business, recruitment, driving new opportunities and reporting. And thankfully, it wasn't that age-old AVE, but more reporting to a UK board, which I thought, God, things are starting to get real here. This is starting to really challenge kind of what I was sort of comfortable with, but putting myself outside of my comfort zone was something that I was quite familiar with. So I got to work on some really cool stuff. So I've mentioned M&S already. I led the PR for Papa John's Pizza. I worked on vintage inns with some celebrity chefs. I got to do some work with Pringles. I worked on John West, the canned fish, maybe not quite so sexy as some of the other things, but really good work nonetheless. And then by 29, I was made director of Grayling Midlands, leading a 600k business with around 10 to 12 employees at the time, but also leading a wider team of 29 people on the M&S account. So I spent a further 3 years at Grayling in this role, driving the team, working with colleagues throughout the business to drive various incentives, mainly around talent and growing sort of more junior members of the business up through the business. And covered literally and travelled the length and breadth of the country almost weekly, which was great for a while, but pretty exhausting. And all in all, I spent 10 years at Grayling, so from entry-level AE to up to director within what became one of the world's biggest PR agencies. So I got many learnings, many stories, many frustrations, but no regrets, which I think is really important. And I'm really proud of what I achieved and the team that I built there. But it was around sort of the end of 2017 that I thought, you know what, I've been here for 10 years. I've learned so much and I've enjoyed every second, but I was really aware that the majority of my career had been in one place. And I don't think it's unusual, and you've probably seen the same, for people to move around a lot in agency. I think most people maybe do 2, 3 years in one place, then they move on and get another set of experiences or a new challenge. And I'd stayed in one place, and that was mainly because the business would change in a good way so often that you never really felt static, and that was a really important thing for me. But I essentially knew I didn't want to work in another large agency. I didn't really want to work in-house. And that's when the opportunity with Whistle came up. So it's a fairly new agency, about 6 years old or so. It's got a great reputation and a brilliant team, which was really, really important for me if I was going to be moving on. It's owner managed, so it's really far removed from what a big PLC might look like. And because of that, change tends to happen quite quickly, and that's a good thing. So if you sort of spot something that you might want to react to, for example, or you see a different way of working that might be better for you and your team, that's easily implemented in a smaller company, whereas in a bigger company, you might need to jump through a few hoops to make that happen. But mine is quite a newly created role as Client Services Director, and it kind of means that I sort of look after the health and well-being, if you like, of the clients that we have at Whistle, in part. So just to make sure that they're getting the service that they pay for from an agency, that we are going above and beyond in the right places without over-servicing or indeed under-servicing what they actually pay us for. We make sure they get the value for money, they have the right teams working on their account, and that we're always thinking of the next step and what the next thing might look for them. One of the things that I'm really keen on is that we don't remain static, that we keep moving with the times and that we keep kind of looking out for that next opportunity for our clients. And essentially, the role that I now have of Whistle is sort of the perfect culmination of all the experience that I've got to date, brought together in one role, which I feel really fortunate to have been able to sidestep into that, because it's not all that common and it doesn't always happen. And again, like my previous 2 roles, it took me a bit of time to get my head around new processes and new clients and working with new people. But I'm pleased to say nearly 12 months in, I finally get it again, and it feels good. So, you know, it wasn't the easiest decision for me to make, and I'm certainly glad that I challenged myself in doing that and sort of saw what's on the other side of agency life, and thank God it paid off. So that's kind of how I've got to where I am, and I really wanted to give you some sort of key tips to take away that I really wish that somebody had told me when I was sat where you guys are thinking about what your next move is going to be. They're not all rosy, but they're realistic, and I just hope that it helps. 1, set your expectations. You will go in at the bottom. You won't be earning a fortune. And you need to work hard to climb in any industry, especially now when, you know, things are politically turbulent and, you know, there are people queuing up for one job. Work hard and you will succeed. And if you're up for that challenge, that's great. If your attitude and your aptitude to learn is there, great. If it isn't, I don't think PR or media is for you, but I'm sure that is not the case for anybody here. Create your own opportunities. Do not expect that to come to you. Go out and find those opportunities. Stand out from the crowd. Put your hand up for anything that comes your way. And challenge yourself to step outside your comfort zone as well, because that's where things happen. Always, always be curious. So always ask questions, learn from other people, learn from other businesses. If you want to move around, that's good. If you don't, learn as much as you can from the people within your team and the people around you. And I was fortunate that my first steps in PR were in a large agency that I could do that. So I learned from B2B professionals and people that worked in consumer PR and digital experts and public affairs. And I learned everything that I could, and I always, always ask questions. And I always still ask questions now, especially of you. Next up, don't pigeonhole yourself too soon. You will come across so many different types of working and different parts of the careers that you choose to go on to. Try not to specialise too soon. Try and be open-minded and get some experience across, you know, each part of that role and what it might present for you. If it's PR, do consumer and do B2B as well. At least until you get to, you know, sort of AD level, so you've really got a good understanding of how things work. I like both, and I probably prefer doing consumer PR, but actually I'm probably better at B2B. So it's about learning where your strengths are and how you can make those work for you. Do your extracurricular work, get networking, get meeting people, form relationships, because that is the crux of any media role you're going to have. Join things like the PRCA and the CIPR and go to their events, and read as well. Read the papers, scan, you know, the websites that you're interested in online, read blogs, just keep your mind open, because that stuff will get stored up there somewhere and you never know when you're going to need to pull it out. Do work experience. I've probably recruited and trained 20, 30 people over the last 10 years, and I will always, always look for where people have got experience if they're coming in at entry level, because A, I want to know how much they understand about the industry, and B, I want to know if they're serious, because you do interview a lot of people, and I would say there's probably only a handful that really stand out. And for me, they've always been the ones that have got that understanding off their own backs. And if I'm going to trust you to deliver, I'm going to want to know that you're up for the challenge. Enjoy it. There is a sense of achievement that you get at the end of delivering a big piece of work. And it's really easy at the time to get bogged down into the, I'm so busy, these nights are so late, I'm surviving on takeaway, this is the worst. But actually, when you look back and when you've delivered that bulky evaluation, you've got the results that you need, there is literally nothing better. So try and enjoy it in the process so that you can look back and think, do you know what, I did a great job. And then finally, always carry a pair of trainers. Because in the media, you are all over the shop all the time, and we'll go in one morning and think, right, we've got a desk day today, and before you know it, you're out with a client, you're chasing the BBC down the road because they're about to interview your clients. So carry your trainers, and I promise you the day will seem a lot easier. So that's me, really. I'm happy. I think, Dils, you're going to do your piece and we're going to take some questions. But by all means, feel free to ask anything about sort of what we do day to day, the industry that we work in, the company that we work for, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Have another round of applause for Hayley Langdon. That was a great talk, Hayley. Thank you very much. Now we're going to take a short break and we will come back to you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back and thanks for joining us live at the Tank in Coventry University for our Careers in the Media guest speakers. Now let's welcome our second guest for the day, Head of Social Whistle PR, Delia Goldsby. Welcome, Delia.
Thank you very much. Hello, hello, hello. Nice to meet you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role that I have currently with Whistle PR as being head of social. It's quite a new job role at Whistle, only created about 7 or 8 months ago when I first joined the organisation. And the reason that the new role, head of social media, was created is that from a customer perspective, more and more organisations want their PR and their social media and their digital to be integrated. So there is more thinking now around how we offer services that can provide all of the social media aspects of what a brand needs or a business-to-business organisation needs, and it dovetails with their PR programmes and with their general communication programmes. And of course, everything to do with social media has a backstop in regards to digital presences, websites and other kind of forms of digital media. So that's really why there's a new role at Whistle. So I guess that leads on to the point that we live in a very integrated world. We live in a very fast-changing world. Communications, when I started back in 1987, which is quite a long time ago, we didn't have mobile phones. We certainly didn't have smartphones. I had an enormous car phone, which kind of sat in my lovely company car. And I talking on the mobile then in those days was anchored to my car. We certainly didn't have websites, and all of our work was kind of face-to-face meetings with journalists out on the hoof. So we didn't have social media. Twitter was unheard of. And when I started to talk about blogging back in the 90s, people were looking at me as if to say, have you gone round the bend? What is a blog? So that's the kind of anachronistic world that I've come from. And that leads me on to my other points around staying flexible and the advice that, as Hayley said at the end of her speech, being flexible, being adaptable, thinking around your surroundings, not just thinking about the bubble of what's happening in the UK, thinking about what's happening worldwide from a social media perspective, from a digital perspective. So we can come on to a little bit more detail about that later on. So back to my point about starting work in 1987. Yes, that's a long time ago. I never wanted to work in PR. I didn't even know what PR was. I wanted to work in advertising, and I wanted to work in advertising in London. And I didn't just want to work for any old agency. I wanted to work for Bartle, Bogle and Hegarty, which may mean something to you guys, I don't know, BBH. And that's where I was going to go and work. I got through to the third interview and I was almost offered the job, but they didn't offer me the job. And the thing that stung, and the reason why I didn't get offered the job, is that I didn't have any work experience. So I've been at Bristol, I'd done business, marketing and finance, but I hadn't got myself any work experience. And that is the big lesson that I learned, that had I had that work experience, I know I would have got that job. So with that in mind, I retreated back to my hometown, which is Leamington Spa, and I ended up working in an estate agent. Great, selling houses, always wanted to do that. Decided I really didn't want to be in a estate agency, and so I worked in another job role, which was selling helicopters and small light aircraft across the globe. So actually I was quite good at that. But I realised I didn't really want to make a career because there was no overseas travel, ironically. So I was based in a desk job in Leamington Spa selling helicopters. Then I met somebody who worked in PR in the same office building, and they said, you've got quite an interesting background. Can you write? I said, yeah, I can write. Come and do some tests for us. Do a few little press releases. Let's see if you can make it in PR. It's like, what is PR? Really, what is PR? However, I landed the job. And obviously that was around 1987, so it's several years ago, several decades ago. So it was a small agency that I worked for, a little boutique agency, but it was quite a strong brand in the Midlands. We worked on big agricultural machinery clients, so I got to work with big Japanese manufacturers like Kubota. You may never have heard of them, but they're quite big in the tractor space. I also ended up working for Massey Ferguson, another kind of Midlands brand that's quite well known. We did a lot of manufacturing, PR. I worked heavily in the automotive space, so I spent a lot of time doing what they call content today, but in those days it was just video news releases, going down onto production lines, filming all sorts of products being made on tracks, automotive tracks. And then I ended up working for McLaren baby buggies as well, which if you're going to move into the world of having babies later on in life, buying your first pram is a big deal, I found out. And I worked for McLaren for a long time, for about 5 years, and we did everything from press releases to crisis management through to big press launches, organising events. So we did regional PR, we did national PR. And actually I really loved working with McLaren. It was absolutely brilliant. However, 10 years passed in my first agency, and a bit like you, I thought, oh gosh, what next? However, what next transpired to be babies, my own babies, so I had children. My children are now 21 and 18, so they're kind of at uni or looking to go to uni, so I kind of get where you guys are at in terms of career aspirations. But after I had my first child, Alex, I decided I couldn't actually tolerate agency life in the way that it was framed, because it is, as Hayley's pointed out, immensely demanding. That's not because I can't work hard or be adaptable. It was I couldn't actually fit it in and be a full-time mum as well. So I had a year off, and then I went independent. And actually becoming an independent freelancer for 10 years was absolutely brilliant. Because what I found was, in the same way that Hayley kind of goes and supports organisations or supports particular aspects of a business, what I ended up doing was working with a whole variety of different PR agencies and digital agencies to support them with their own PR, but also to develop campaigns, to be that extra kind of brain power. And I developed a really nice little business around that. So I ended up working for the British Jewellery Association. I worked for a drinks brand. I worked for an insolvency agency. So I worked for a variety of different types of organisations and businesses, all with different demands and different kind of audience types. So it taught me a lot. I would say one of the most important aspects of what happened when I was working freelance was working for a large digital agency at the time when digital had really started to take off and that websites had become the kind of the key communications tool for business-to-business organisations, but also for consumers. What I also realised is that digital and social media had started to really change the way the press operated. So it was no longer a case of having press relations with traditional print. It was more about how do you reach an audience through digital and through social media. So I got lucky and I ended up working on some big website transformation projects. So I worked for some big organisations like Lloyds TSB Commercial Finance, for Alstom, for Lufthansa, for Reckitt Benckiser, so big household names, big corporates, but all with slightly different kind of demands. The wonderful thing about being freelance is that I got to work in Paris and Brussels, and I have to say I did absolutely love all of that business. It was great. So going overseas and sort of working with the Europeans was absolutely brilliant. I did a lot of event work in London, so I kept my mind open. I had a lot of opportunities. I accepted some of them. I made sure I charged a decent rate. And if you are thinking about freelance or independent work at any point, that's a big piece of advice. Make sure you charge the right price and that you have your setup set up accordingly. So in terms of projects that companies that I work with from a social media perspective, as a freelancer, I worked with Suzuki Motorbikes. I created content for those guys. I absolutely love that, as you can imagine. I've also worked for Peugeot, training a lot of their dealerships, so out and about training their dealerships in terms of social media. And I've worked with a variety of other organisations such as Bosch, Tooling, etc. However, being on your own and working on your own can be quite tough. And whilst it's great because you have independence, you don't report into anybody, you manage your own finances, it's actually quite lonely. So you haven't got that team resource. It's not like working in an agency, not like working in an owner-managed agency, whereby you get to work with your team and you get to bounce ideas off. And that's partly what the fun is all about in an agency, and why, you know, agencies as a model still exist. So I decided couldn't be doing the freelance anymore, all the contracts. I'd look for an agency job. And it just so happens that Whistle came across me, and it was through a recruitment consultant who found me online and said, would you be interested in a new role at Whistle? So I was like, new role? What's that all about? So that's when I took the plunge about 6-7 months ago to kind of drop back into agency, and realised again what you miss as an independent. There's pluses for being an independent freelancer, and there's obviously lots of pluses as being part of an agency. So I guess my point in my talk is that stay flexible, stay open-minded, stay clued up with what's going on in the industry. For goodness sake, just be informed. Don't ever go to an interview without having researched the company, having looked at their social, having looked at their digital. Really think about understanding how social media has a role to play in your communications, and certainly from a PR perspective. For goodness sake, get yourselves networked. As Hayley said, the CIPR, Chartered Institute of PR, the PRCA and other networking organisations have great student rates. So if you haven't joined already, you jolly well should do. And keep your network going. Because I work with people, you know, I've called on people that I worked with 5 years ago. I've got a guy coming in next week who's a digital expert who's going to come and do some support work with us. So I always keep my network warm, and I mean genuinely warm. Stay flexible, stay adaptable, learn, just as Hayley said. And working in coffee shops is an option. I think flexibility and the sort of forthcoming rollout of the G5 network will allow you to be swifter and faster to move on the hoof. And I think all of us do a lot of stuff on our phone. I'm never off my phone because I look after social media and I do a lot of content and a lot of sharing and a lot of social media advertising. I'm constantly watching the analytics. And constantly watching what's happening and who's interacting and how is it optimising. So all of those things are absolutely crucial in terms of understanding the role of social media and maybe the careers that you might have in social media. And I'm bound to ask, you know, if any of you have ever thought about the PR sort of social media side of things as a career option. Show of hands. Anybody interested in that area? Yeah? it's good. It's a growth area. Yeah, so yeah, so that's basically me in a nutshell, and I'm sure we've got some questions. So yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again, Delia. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you to both our guest speakers for these very informative sessions. If you want to find out more about our speakers or follow them on their social media challenge channels, search for @Whistle on Twitter. Now we will be having a Q&A sessions. So for any members of our audience, do we have any questions? Yeah.
I'm missing something, sorry.
How would you say that the growth of social media influence has changed the skill set you need to have when going into PR?
Social media influence or influence?
Yeah. Kind of like the influence it has on society today. How would you think it's changed that skill set, if at all?
I think the growth of social media influence means that you have to use a lot of technology to actually monitor conversations, and I think I think you have to steer a kind of a midway between the kind of polarised views around social media, because social media has a lot of good, has a lot of bad. You hear a lot about the negative things around social media, and you hear and sometimes it overwrites the good things about social media. From a business to business perspective, and from a PR communications perspective, my overriding strategic output is that I have to focus on whether our target audiences are in the social media spaces. So in order to reach potential target customers for a brand or for a client, I have to understand how those customers are using social media. I have to understand how they're using social media in the context of their own digital reading, whether they read newspapers, their media consumption behaviours. And then I have to understand geographically where those people are. So there's a lot of research that goes in to thinking about how you create a social media campaign or strategy that works with a PR strategy. So it's not just a case of, yeah, let's set up some social feeds and whack out a few bits of content and do some hashtags. There's an awful lot of work that goes into really understanding the consumer and whether or not it's even worth reaching out to them in social. So that's what I would say about social, is that you have to get really granular.
And it complements kind of what we do from a PR point of view, and we find ourselves working more and more together for one challenge, and sort of understanding that those audiences don't just consume one thing, they're probably consuming 5, 6, 7 things at any one time. So it's about finding that balance between the two and having complementary activity that plays out across both.
Hiya, I just wanted to ask, what are the major differences in working in a London-based big agency to a smaller, maybe local one here?
Shall I take that?
Yeah.
The differences can be huge, and I think it depends what sector it is you operate in. And I think the reasons that people work for one or the other are quite obvious as well. I think a lot of people that work in PR are expecting the big clients with the big names, the household brand. Actually, that's not necessarily the case anymore. And we find a lot of clients kind of pick their agency not because of where they're geographically based, but because they will do a good job. So I think, you know, there was always the aspiration to go and work for the big London agency before, and certainly when I was starting out, the appeal for working with a big company such as the one I did was because there was, you know, the opportunity to go up and down to London. But actually we did just as good a job in the Midlands as to what our colleagues in London did. And I think that's a really important point. And I think, you know, working for an agency that isn't based in London does not devalue the great work that you can do, both from a creative point of view, but from a delivery point of view. And I come back to what I said before, relationships are the most important thing in any media career. And if you can build those relationships from anywhere, which you can, because you've got LinkedIn, you've got social media, and you've got a phone, you know, do that. And that's kind of how I've always sort of worked in my career, is I will not pigeon myself sort of in a space because I don't work in London, and I will engineer the opportunity to be there if I need to be.
Got another question. What are the top skills that agencies look for, you know, in graduates? You know,
Communication.
okay.
The ability to hold a conversation. I know that seems so basic, but we come across so many candidates that simply can't have a proper conversation, can't look you in the eye and talk to you and you know, talk intelligently even. So communication for me is a really big part of what I look for as a recruiter.
And adaptability around technology and, you know, using technology to its fullest extent. So, yeah.
That actually leads to a question I had on technology. A lot of the guests that we have had come to visit this year and last year as well talk of nowadays, to use that term, needing to be multi-skilled on being able to record, being able to photograph, being able to do things on social media. Do you think that that's as important in the PR industry, that you now need to be multi-skilled in a variety of kind of technical, yeah?
I think certainly in a content-driven world now, I know, you know, contents can be a source of annoyance really, because PR people have always delivered content, human interest stories, all those things that are news hooks are content and in the way that we describe them today. But I think the way we record content, live content, how we manage those live streams and how we maybe record content from a mobile phone and then being able to edit it, so you get relatively good quality video where when you potentially don't have big budgets. So it's about being able to utilise those technologies and deliver back a good piece of production. So yeah, having those production values and being able to manage a production budget, for example, is crucial. And I would say budgeting and being able to manage the kind of the budgets that you have given by clients. They want a lot of value. If they give you £30,000 to do a piece of content, you know, they need to see the value on that, and you have to be really cognizant of that when you're working with a client.
I think to kind of put another spin on that, in agency life you are often expected to be everything, and actually sometimes you can't be everything. And I think I definitely believe in playing to your strengths, which I think, you know, in an agency you have that ability to do. I think as a, you know, a one-man band, for example, a freelance like Delia was saying, you kind of just have to be really good at all of that stuff. But in an agency where you've perhaps spent a bit of time, you've proved yourself, actually focusing on what you're really good at will also stand you in good stead. And play to your strengths, because somebody else hopefully will be great at the things that maybe are not your biggest asset.
Could you detail a little more some of those terms that you've used, like freelance, like business to business, and how they work in the PR industry? Just, I think, Delia, you said you worked freelance for quite some time. So if you could refresh on the top 5 freelance, the kind of top 5 reasons to work freelance, and then the top 5 reasons to work for an agency, so we can kind of understand the differences there.
Top 5, okay. Yeah, so top reasons are usually flexibility around family life, so you can't avoid the subject. I don't want to avoid the subject. It worked better for me to be able to work freelance, to deliver a project against a deadline, but it didn't matter if I worked at 3 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, as long as the work was delivered, because I had to think about my children, and that's an issue in the industry. So it suited me to work freelance. So that's the first thing, flexibility. The second thing is autonomy. It's great to be autonomous. It's, as you said when you first started working in as a journalist, being able to make your own decisions. They're your decisions. You live and die, you know, breathe by those decisions. So that's number 2. Number 3 is you get a diversity of projects. So I've worked with some great brands as a freelancer. That I'm really proud of the work that I did, and you're able to be more persuasive, more agile, and kind of get the client to do what you think is right. I think on the negative side is as I highlighted, you don't have other people necessarily to go and have that kind of coffee with, or to kind of cross compare, or kind of get some ideas, or work with the team. So that's you know, that can be quite lonely. And I think working in agency as well, you I guess you can work on bigger scale projects, as you said. You can work with different skill sets, because you can't sometimes be all things to all people, as you said. But I would say the one thing about being a freelancer is that you have to run the commercials. You have to be bold. You have to say that invoice gets paid on that day. And that's the one thing I would say I'd learnt over 10 years, is that you have to be credit controller, you have to be production project manager, you have to be creative thinker, you have to be deliverer, you know, etc., etc.
So the organisational skills for freelance are really high in that sense.
Yeah. Otherwise, you don't get paid. It's the best return on investment, isn't it, for a client, if you don't get paid, you know, because you haven't done the job. So yes, you're much more exposed, I would say, in terms of delivery. But the more experience you get, the better at kind of delivering what you can promise to the client, really.
Thanks.
So. And I think, you know, from an agency point of view, it's all the sort of negatives that you said about freelance, that you turn that into the positive for an agency. You know, you've got the security within an agency, and you have that bigger backdrop. You know, like Delia was saying, if you're on your own, you're the one that goes out to find business, whereas when you're part of a team, you as a team go and find that business, and you know what? If you don't win that business, it's all right, you've still got work, but you'll go out and find the next piece. And I think that's probably, from an agency point of view, it's, you know, that security of knowing it doesn't sort of, the be all and end all isn't today, it's longer than that. And the creativity part of it as well, and the opportunity to work with a bigger backdrop of people. And I personally work better in a 2 or a 3 rather than a 6 and a 7, but that does work for some people. But even, you know, if you're a 1, that still doesn't bring out the best in terms of creativity sometimes. Some people can, some people just can't. And I'd say they're probably the 2 biggies for me from an agency point of view. What I would say, though, is a lot of really, you know, successful freelancers have started agencies. They've started as the freelance. So actually the agency morals that they carry and the processes that they have come from being a brilliantly organised freelancer, which speaks volumes, I think.
Yeah.
And you've worked, sorry, Hayley, you've worked both within agency and within in-house PR teams?
No, I've never worked in in-house PR. I actually, yes it is, yeah. I actually love agency, and I mean, agency life is really busy. No 2 days are the same. And I remember very specifically from being a really young age saying, I never want to work in a job that's the same every day. And agency will never be the same every day. Now, I'm not saying in-house would be, but when you work in-house, you work on one brand, one client for one company. With agency, you get to dip in and out of multiple sectors. I mean, I know things about sectors I have no interest in outside of work, genuinely, but actually, I've learned so much, and you become a bit of an ambassador for that kind of work. So, which is why I love agency. I'm not saying never for in-house, and it's still a very viable way of building a PR career, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Can I just join with one personal question, actually? A little bit different from all of this. So you both said that you enjoy writing, and as a person who enjoys writing as well, I really want to know how to gain some more confidence in writing, because I think I suffer from lack of confidence. So if you can just tell some tips and tricks.
What do you write?
Just enjoy expressing myself on writing, everything, like all of the things around me which are happening with my life, or like political views. It doesn't matter, just I enjoy expressing myself on a piece of paper.
Do you have a blog?
Yes, but I am not like, I'm afraid of failing, so I don't know, I'm just like,
I think the beauty of
enough confidence of that.
But a blog, I think you can, to a degree, be faceless. You know, you don't have to put yourself out there, you put your words out there. And I think a blog, you know, I wish that as a teenager, I guess, that was an opportunity for me to write. I would, you know, write what you want, when you want, how you want. The beauty of a blog is that it's, you know, your expression, and it's subjective, it's your thoughts. So nobody can judge you on that because it's yours and it's your opinion.
Yeah, so you can't possibly be failing because
Not at all.
You can't fail at your thoughts. They are your thoughts, and how you want to write is, you know, just wipe your mind of thoughts of failure, for sure. Because nobody's benchmarking you.
No.
So
I have to continue on.
yeah, you have to continue. Persevere.
Yeah,
That's the other
definitely.
thing. Definitely perseverance is a key skill. Get gritty. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much.
I'm related to that. Sorry, I do have one last question
All right.
because of this discussion here. Hayley, you particularly mentioned that that you had previously and had always wanted to work in journalism. And I think Nicoletta's interest is in journalism and writing around journalism and politics particularly. We had a PR company in last year called Advent, who are a Coventry PR company, and they hire specifically from journalists.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what parallels you could see between those two industries. Is it kind of writing for audiences and that
Yes.
kind of thing that
I think
links them?
it's not uncommon for a journalist to move into PR. First of all, I
That's
would
what it
say it's really common, and I don't know, maybe I couldn't give you a stat on it, but I know a lot of people that have done it. It is different in the sense of, you know, the whole freedom of speech with being a journalist. And yes, there will always be parameters of which you can and can't write. And obviously you'll need to take, you know, the company's views into consideration when you're doing that. But I'd say the freedom of journalism writing is very different to writing for PR. I missed, when I first came out of journalism into PR, I missed that side of it and the autonomy to write what I wanted to, in a sense. And, you know, I would pick the stories that I write, or, you know, there would be some breaking news that you kind of just have to cover because it's breaking news. You don't get that so much in PR. But what I would say is that the way that we create content now is very different to how when I first started. And we do a lot more what we call newsjacking, which is reacting to what's happening in the media, which does bring back, I feel, that sense of autonomy a little bit. And where you can relate it back to a client, I think that's kind of where you can get a bit more creative. We do a lot of blog and guest writing for clients, which again, I think gives you a bit more of a sense of freedom when you're writing, as opposed to when you're trying to kind of market something, essentially. So there are lots of synergies. They're not the same. They'll never be the same, but I think it's a really good alternative to print or even online journalism.
There's real transferable skills between the two industries.
Definitely transferable skills. Definitely transferable skills.
Yeah, I think that the kind of news hound aspect of PR and journalism applies well to social as well, in that, you know, we have to monitor social media channels for our clients, and things can go wrong. You know, people will have views and they'll show them on the social channels or the LinkedIn channels. So we have crises that occur in social that we have to manage through social channels. And again, I think having that kind of news ability to be able to see where the story's coming from, what's going to happen to that story. Is it going to jump into mainstream media? Does it come from mainstream media? Is it just a troll? You know, why are they doing this? What's their trigger? So all of those kind of investigative triggers, if you like, that come into play when you're a journalist apply to social.
Yeah, and I think coming from a journalistic background, you can foresee very easily what a journalist wants out of you in that kind of situation. We deal with a lot of crisis or issues management where, you know, when things go wrong. And I think a lot of the time it's down to us to really determine what a response from a particular client might look like. And, you know, sometimes it's a bit of a battle for us, I think, to sort of persuade the client the sorts of things they should be saying and how they should be coming across when you are dealing with a tricky situation. And sometimes it is, you know, it's a client-owned goal. It's something that has, you know, gone wrong. But having the ability to, I think, tune into actually what a journalist would want to hear from us within the parameters of what we really want to release it's you know, a skill that maybe you can only really hone had you have been on the other side of the desk.
It is that knowledge of being on the other side and
Yeah.
therefore knowing what they're looking for and how to pitch it
I
to
think
them
so.
in that sense.
Yeah, and it's certainly a learned thing as well. You know, a lot of people that work in the PR industry stay in it for years and years and years, and you know, you get to know how that side of it works. But I don't think, you know, in the same way that I talked to you all about work experience, there's nothing like having been there, done that. Mm.
Thank you, Hayley and Delia, for joining us today. We hope everyone enjoyed these sessions. We will be back next week, where we will be joined by guests from Midlands Arts Centre and Big Cat Agency on the theme of marketing and communications. Thanks for watching.